My parents insisted everything was equal. The trust documents say otherwise. I was sitting in attorney Michael Brennan's office when he slid the folder across his mahogany desk, and I remember thinking how strange it was that my hands were already shaking before I'd even opened it. Brennan had 23 years of estate law under his belt, and his face had that practiced neutrality that lawyers wear when they're about to ruin your day. "You should read pages 15 through 22 first," he said quietly. "Then we'll talk." I flipped to page 15, and that's when my entire childhood revealed itself as a carefully constructed lie. The trust my parents had established wasn't split evenly between my sister and me. It wasn't even close. The numbers swam in front of my eyes, but even through my shock, the math was brutally clear. She was getting approximately 85% of everything. I was getting the leftovers. My parents had spent 30 years telling us that everything was equal, that they loved us the same, that they'd never play favorites. Every birthday, every Christmas, every graduation, they'd made this elaborate show of fairness. When Lily got a car for her 16th birthday, I got one too, exactly 6 months later when I turned 16. When she got money for college, I got the same amount, down to the dollar. They drilled it into us so thoroughly that I'd internalized it as fact, as immutable as gravity. Even as adults, when people asked about my family, I'd say with complete confidence that my parents were scrupulously fair. I'd believed it so deeply that sitting in Brennan's office, staring at legal documents that proved otherwise, felt like discovering I was colorblind and had been seeing the world wrong my entire life. The worst part wasn't the money itself, though God knows that stung. The worst part was realizing that every time they'd looked me in the eye and promised equality, they'd been lying. And they'd been good at it. I'd scheduled the appointment with Brennan 3 weeks earlier, right after my father's funeral. Dad had died suddenly, a massive heart attack at 68 while playing golf on a Saturday morning. One moment he was lining up a putt, the next he was gone. Mom had been devastated, and Lily and I had stepped up to handle arrangements, notify relatives, organize the service. Through all of it, Mom had been almost obsessively insistent that Lily and I work together and remember we're family. At the time, I'd thought she was just grieving, trying to hold on to what mattered. Now, sitting with these documents, I understood she'd been managing us, controlling the narrative before we could discover the truth. The funeral had been on a Saturday, and the following Wednesday, Mom had gathered us in the living room and handed us each a sealed envelope. "Your father and I wanted you both to know that everything is handled," she'd said, her voice still hoarse from crying. "Everything is equal, just like we always promised. The attorney has all the details, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. You're both loved exactly the same." I'd believed her. God help me. Even after everything that came next, that was the part that hurt most. I'd sat there on the couch, holding her hand, telling her not to worry about any of this, that Lily and I would figure it out together. My sister had nodded along, her eyes red from crying, and we'd all hugged. It was only later, when I'd actually called the attorney's office to schedule an appointment, that the first crack appeared in the facade. The receptionist had said, "Oh yes, Mr. Brennan has been expecting your call. Your mother said you'd be reaching out separately." Separately, not together. I'd dismissed it as a miscommunication, but something about it nagged at me. Why would we need separate appointments if everything was equal? Why wouldn't we just go in together, sign whatever needed signing, and be done with it? I'd pushed the thought away, told myself I was being paranoid, that grief was making me suspicious of nothing. But I'd kept the appointment separate anyway, something instinctive making me want to see the documents myself, alone. Now, in Brennan's office, that instinct felt like the only smart decision I'd made in months. I forced myself to keep reading. The trust had been established 8 years ago, funded with the proceeds from my parents' business sale and various investments they'd accumulated over their marriage. Total value, approximately $4 million. According to the documents, upon my father's death, the trust would be divided according to predetermined percentages. Lily's portion, 85%, roughly $3.4 million. My portion, 15%, roughly $600,000. I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. But the language was clear, drafted by professionals, notarized and witnessed. There was a separate provision for Mom, naturally, ensuring she'd be comfortable for life. But between the 2 children, the split wasn't even remotely equal. It was a slaughter. I looked up at Brennan, and my voice came out strangled. "Did my sister know about this?" Brennan's expression told me everything before he spoke. "I met with Ms. Lily Hartwell yesterday afternoon," he said carefully. She reviewed her portion of the trust documents and seemed unsurprised by the contents. The professional language couldn't quite hide what he meant. Lily had known. Maybe not for 8 years, but she'd known before I did, and she hadn't been shocked. I thought back to the funeral, to that moment in the living room when Mom had promised everything was equal. Lily had been sitting right there. She'd heard the same words I had nodded along with the same apparent sincerity, and she'd said nothing. "Did she ask about my portion?" I heard myself ask. Brennan shifted slightly, uncomfortable. "She asked if you'd scheduled your appointment yet. I told her that was confidential." Which meant Lily had been checking on me, wondering if I'd discovered the truth yet, wondering how long the lie could hold, My hands were shaking harder now, and I had to set the documents down before I crumpled them. Why? I asked, though I wasn't even sure what I was asking. Why the disparity? Why the lie? Why any of this? Brennan cleared his throat. The trust documents include a letter of intent from your parents, he said, pulling out another sheet. It's not legally binding, but it explains their reasoning. Would you like to read it? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He handed me a single page, and I recognized my father's letterhead immediately. The letter was dated 8 years ago, right after the business sale. It was written in Dad's precise handwriting, the same script I'd seen on birthday cards and report cards my entire life. To whom it may concern, it began, formal and cold. Patricia and I have structured our trust to reflect not equal distribution, but equitable distribution based on need and circumstances. Our daughter Lily has demonstrated exceptional financial responsibility and has invested wisely in her future. She has also taken on significant family obligations, including the care and support of her grandmother during her final years. Our son Daniel has made different choices. While we love him equally, we recognize that he has pursued a career in education, which, while noble, will not provide the same financial security. We have therefore weighted the trust to ensure both children end up in comparable positions, accounting for their different life paths and contributions to the family. I had to read it twice before the full insult landed. They were calling it equitable, as if giving my sister 85% of their estate was somehow fair because I'd chosen to be a high school history teacher instead of going into finance like Lily. As if my career choice meant I deserved less inheritance. The part about Lily caring for our grandmother was particularly galling because I'd been there too, visiting her every week in the nursing home, managing her medical appointments when Lily was traveling for work. But somehow that had been rewritten in their minds, or at least in this letter, as Lily's sole contribution. And the final insult, to ensure both children end up in comparable positions. As if they were doing me a favor. As if this massive disparity was actually about making things fair. I set the letter down carefully, afraid of what I might do if I kept holding it. This is dated 8 years ago, I said, my voice flat. My father had 8 years to tell me about this. 8 years to explain their reasoning face to face. Instead, they kept lying to me about everything being equal. Brennan nodded slowly. I did advise them, at the time the trust was created, that transparency might prevent future conflicts. They felt strongly that the information should remain confidential until after both parents had passed. Which meant Mom knew I was sitting here right now, discovering this. She'd known when she handed me that envelope and promised everything was equal. She'd known at the funeral when she squeezed my hand and told me not to worry. She'd lied to my face, deliberately and repeatedly, knowing exactly what these documents said. Is there any way to contest this? I asked, already knowing the answer. Brennan's expression was sympathetic, but firm. The trust is ironclad. Your parents were very clear about their wishes, and they had the right to distribute their assets as they saw fit. Unless you can prove diminished capacity or undue influence, which given the 8-year timeline would be nearly impossible, the distribution stands. So that was it. $600,000, which should have felt like a fortune, but instead felt like a slap in the face. Meanwhile, my sister walked away with nearly 6 times that amount, and my parents' blessing. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning through every interaction I'd had with my parents over the past 8 years, looking for signs I'd missed. How many times had we had dinner together while they sat across from me, knowing they'd structured their estate to favor my sister? How many times had they asked about my teaching job, nodding along as I talked about my students, while secretly judging my career choice as worth less than Lily's corporate success? The worst part was the way they'd weaponized the appearance of equality. Every matching gift, every identical gesture, had been a smokescreen to hide the massive disparity they'd built into their legacy. I thought about my 16th birthday, when they'd surprised me with that car 6 months after Lily got hers. I'd been so happy, so convinced it proved they didn't play favorites. Now I wondered if they'd bought it specifically to maintain the illusion, to keep me compliant and unsuspecting until they were both gone, and it was too late to confront them about it. My father was already dead, forever beyond my reach, and my mother was still lying. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to do next. My wife Rachel was inside, probably making dinner, completely unaware that our financial future had just been cut by 85%. We'd been planning to use my inheritance to finally buy a house, to get out of our cramped apartment, and give our daughter Mia a backyard to play in. $600,000 would still help, but it wasn't the $2 million we'd been expecting. It wasn't half of $4 million. It wasn't what we'd been promised, implicitly and explicitly, for my entire adult life. I told Rachel what my mom had said. Everything is equal. We'd celebrated quietly, guiltily, knowing that my father's death had secured our future even as we mourned him. Now I had to go inside and tell her it was all a lie. That my parents had decided decades of teaching high school students didn't earn me the same inheritance as my sister's finance career. That we'd have to scale back our dreams because I'd chosen a profession they'd always claimed to respect. Rachel took it better than I expected, which somehow made it worse. She held me while I explained, her hand rubbing circles on my back, and when I finally ran out of words, she just said quietly, "What do you want to do?" I didn't have an answer. What could I do? The trust was legal. My father was dead. My mother had made her position clear through 8 years of deliberate deception. Lily had known, or at least hadn't been surprised, and had said nothing to warn me. I was surrounded by people who'd agreed, either actively or through silence, that I deserved less. I need to talk to Lily, I finally said. I need to hear her explain how she knew about this and didn't tell me. Rachel nodded. Do you want me there? I shook my head. This was something I needed to face alone, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe because some part of me still hoped there was an explanation, that Lily would be horrified, that she'd offer to split things evenly anyway. That hope felt pathetic even as I clung to it, but I couldn't seem to let it go. I called Lily that night, and she answered on the second ring, her voice carefully neutral. Hey, I was wondering when you'd call. Not if. When. As if she'd been waiting for this conversation, bracing for it. You knew, I said, skipping any pretense of small talk. About the trust, the distribution. You knew, and you didn't tell me. There was a long pause, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I found out about 6 months ago, she finally said. Mom told me. She said Dad wanted me to know before anything happened to him, so I'd be prepared. 6 months. My father had been alive 6 months ago. Lily had sat through family dinners, through Dad's birthday party in October, through Thanksgiving, knowing about the trust, and saying nothing. And it didn't occur to you to give me a heads up? I asked, my voice tight. To maybe mention that everything wasn't actually equal like they'd been promising our entire lives? Another pause. It wasn't my place, Lily said quietly. It was their decision, their money. I didn't agree with keeping it secret, but I also didn't think it was my right to go against their wishes. The careful reasonableness of her response made me want to throw my phone across the room. They're giving you $3.4 million, Lily, 85% of everything. And you don't think you had any obligation to tell me I was only getting $600,000? To prepare me for finding out our parents had been lying to us? To you, Lily corrected, her voice sharper now. They'd been lying to you. I knew the truth. The distinction hit like a physical blow. She was right. For 6 months, maybe longer, Lily had been on the inside of the lie while I'd been the target of it. She and our parents had formed a circle that excluded me, and she'd been comfortable enough with that arrangement to say nothing. Did you agree with it? I asked. The distribution. Do you think you deserve 85%? Silence. Then quietly, I think they had their reasons. That's not what I asked. More silence. Dan, I don't want to fight about this, she finally said. I know you're upset, and you have a right to be, but this was their decision. We can't change it now. I laughed, a bitter sound that surprised me. You could change it. You could refuse to accept such a massively unequal distribution. You could offer to split things evenly, the way they always told us things would be split. That's not how inheritance works, Lily said, her lawyer voice emerging. The trust is structured the way it's structured. I can't just redistribute it because you're upset. Can't or won't, I shot back. A long exhale. Dan, I'm not having this conversation right now. You're emotional, and I get that. But I'm not going to apologize for accepting an inheritance our parents legally set up. If you have issues with their reasoning, that's between you and them. Well, between you and Mom now, I guess. The callousness of it, the casual dismissal, broke something in me. You know what the worst part is? I said. It's not even the money. It's that you all decided I wasn't worth the truth. That you sat across from me at Thanksgiving, at Dad's birthday, at his funeral, and you lied to my face. All of you. And you're still lying now, pretending this is just about their decision when you're actively choosing to benefit from it without question. I'm hanging up now, Lily said, her voice cold. Call me when you're ready to have a rational conversation. The line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, that pathetic hope finally extinguished. There would be no family reconciliation, no moment where Lily revealed a heart of gold and offered to make things right. She'd known for months, she'd accepted the distribution without protest, and she was prepared to watch me struggle with the betrayal while she walked away with millions. Our parents had raised us to believe we were equals, partners, teammates. They'd lied, and Lily was fine with that, as long as she came out ahead. I thought about calling my mother, demanding an explanation, but what would be the point? She'd had 8 years to tell me the truth. She'd chosen lies instead. Confronting her now wouldn't change the trust, wouldn't restore my faith in the family I'd thought I had. It would just give her another opportunity to explain why I deserved less, why my choices had been wrong, why their deception had been justified. Rachel found me sitting in the dark living room an hour later, and she didn't ask what Lily had said. She just sat next to me, took my hand, and waited. She knew for 6 months, I finally said. Mom told her, and Lily decided it wasn't her place to warn me. Rachel squeezed my hand. I'm sorry. She's not going to offer to split it evenly. She thinks she deserves it. Maybe she does, Rachel said quietly, and I jerked my head toward her, shocked. She held up a hand. I'm not saying I agree. I'm saying that's what she thinks. That's what your parents told her, probably for months. They convinced her it was fair, that she'd earned it, that you didn't need it as much. And she believed them, or she wanted to believe them, because it benefited her to believe them. It was the most cynical thing I'd ever heard Rachel say, and it was probably true. My parents had seeded the ground carefully, giving Lily months to accept the narrative before my father died. They'd framed it as equitable, as rational, as a reasonable reflection of different life choices. And Lily had bought it, because $3.4 million was a very convincing argument. Over the next few days, I started doing math I'd never wanted to do. How much had my parents spent on each of us over our lifetimes? Had they been scrupulously equal during our childhoods, or had there been disparities I'd missed? I dug through old photos, looking for clues. Lily's graduation party had been at a country club. Mine had been in our backyard. I'd never thought about it at the time, had actually preferred the casual backyard setup. But now I wondered if it had been a sign, an early indication that they valued her achievements more than mine. Her college was private and expensive. Mine was a state school. They'd paid for both, and I'd been grateful. But had they resented my cheaper education less? Had they seen it as me being less ambitious, less worthy of investment? These thoughts were poison, I knew that. They were turning every memory into evidence, contaminating 36 years of family history with suspicion and resentment. But I couldn't stop. Every interaction, every gift, every conversation was now subject to reinterpretation through the lens of that trust document. And the more I looked, the more patterns I found, or thought I found. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there, or maybe I'd been blind my entire life. I made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Rebecca Winters, who specialized in family conflict and grief. I needed to talk to someone neutral, someone who wouldn't have a stake in defending my parents or my sister. Dr. Winters had 15 years of clinical experience, and her office was mercifully calm, all soft colors and comfortable chairs. I told her everything: the funeral, the trust, the letter, Lily's 6-month silence, the realization that my entire family had conspired to keep me in the dark. She listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, her expression professionally sympathetic. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before asking, "What bothers you most, the money or the deception?" "The deception," I said immediately. If they'd told me 8 years ago that they were structuring things this way, I would have been hurt, but at least I would have known where I stood. The fact that they lied for so long, that they made such a show of equality while planning this massive disparity, that's what I can't get past. Dr. Winters nodded. "It sounds like the trust documents violated a fundamental promise they'd made to you about your worth within the family. Not just financial worth, but emotional worth." Exactly. That was exactly it. The money was significant, but the real damage was to my sense of belonging, of being valued equally. My parents had spent decades telling me I mattered as much as Lily, and then they'd put their true feelings in writing. I mattered less. 15% less, to be precise. 85% less, from another angle. "Do you think they loved me?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Dr. Winters set down her pen. "I think people are capable of loving their children while also treating them unequally. Love and fairness aren't the same thing. Your parents may have genuinely loved you while also believing that Lily deserved more of their estate. Those feelings can coexist, as contradictory as that seems." "But they lied about it," I pressed. "They promised equality knowing they'd built inequality into the trust. That's not just unequal treatment, that's active deception." "Yes, Doctor," Winters agreed. "And that deception is its own betrayal, separate from the unequal distribution. They chose to manage your expectations through dishonesty, rather than having a difficult but honest conversation. That speaks to their conflict avoidance, their desire to maintain a certain image, and possibly their own discomfort with their decision." She paused. "Have you considered that they might have known, on some level, that their reasoning was flawed? That if they'd told you the truth 8 years ago, you would have challenged it, and they didn't want to face that challenge?" I hadn't considered that, but it made a sick kind of sense. If they'd believed their decision was truly fair and equitable, why hide it? Why go to such lengths to maintain the lie? Maybe because they knew that their justification, their letter about career choices and financial responsibility, wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. Maybe because they knew I'd point out all the ways their reasoning was self-serving and cruel. So instead of defending their position, they'd simply hidden it until my father's death made confrontation impossible. "What do you want to do?" Dr. Winters asked, echoing Rachel's question from days earlier. I still didn't have a good answer. "I want them to admit they were wrong," I said. "I want my sister to acknowledge that this isn't fair. I want my mother to apologize for lying. But none of that is going to happen, is it?" Dr. Winters tilted her head slightly. "People often surprise us. But I'd encourage you to think about what you can control versus what you can't. You can't control whether your mother admits wrongdoing or whether Lily offers to redistribute the inheritance. You can control how you respond, what boundaries you set, and what kind of relationship you're willing to have going forward with people who've betrayed your trust." Boundaries. The word felt both empowering and terrifying. What boundaries could I set? I could cut off my mother, refuse to speak to her until she acknowledged the deception. I could distance myself from Lily, make it clear that our relationship had been fundamentally damaged. But those actions felt like punishing myself as much as them. I'd be the one without a mother, without a sister, while they went on with their lives and their millions. That night, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I started researching the ethics of unequal inheritance. I found article after article about parents who'd disinherited children, who'd favored one sibling over another, who'd used their estates to reward or punish adult behavior. Some of the stories made my situation look mild by comparison. Adult children who'd been completely cut out for being gay, for marrying the wrong person, for choosing the wrong religion. Adult children who'd dedicated years to caregiving only to discover a sibling who'd been absent, got everything. The comment sections were always vicious, split between people who defended the parents' right to do whatever they wanted with their money, and people who argued that inheritance was about more than money, it was about final judgment and validation. I fell into that second camp. My parents' trust wasn't just a financial document, it was their last word on my value compared to Lily's. And their last word was that I was worth 15%. I found a forum for people dealing with family estrangement and unequal inheritance, and I posted my story anonymously. The responses came quickly, a mix of sympathy and harsh advice. Cut them off, several people urged. They've shown you who they are. Believe them. Others were more measured. Take the $600,000 and walk away. It's still more than most people get. A few suggested legal action, though when I explained that the trust was ironclad, they acknowledged there wasn't much I could do. One response stuck with me, though. A woman whose father had left everything to her brother wrote, "The hardest part isn't the money. It's realizing that you built your understanding of your family on a foundation of lies, and now you have to decide whether to rebuild or walk away from the rubble. Either choice is valid, but both are painful." That was it exactly. My foundation was rubble. Everything I'd thought I knew about my parents, about my sister, about my place in the family, had been built on the promise of equality. With that promise revealed as a lie, I had nothing solid left to stand on. I decided I needed to confront my mother in person. Not because I expected an apology or an admission of wrongdoing, but because I needed to look her in the eye and tell her what she'd done. I needed her to know that her lies had consequences, that I understood exactly what she and my father had done. Rachel offered to come with me, but I went alone, driving to my childhood home on a Saturday morning. Mom answered the door looking older than I remembered, her grief over my father still evident in the shadows under her eyes. "Daniel," she said, surprise and something else, maybe wariness, in her voice. "I wasn't expecting you." "I met with the attorney," I said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I read the trust documents, and I read Dad's letter explaining why you decided I deserve 15% while Lily gets 85. Her face went carefully blank. "Maybe we should talk inside." I followed her into the living room, the same room where she'd promised me everything was equal. We sat in the same spots, but everything felt different now, poisoned by knowledge. "I wanted to tell you," Mom started, but I cut her off. "When? When did you want to tell me? 8 years ago when you set up the trust? 6 months ago when you told Lily? At the funeral when you handed me that envelope and lied to my face?" She flinched. "Your father thought it would be easier if you didn't know until after he was gone. He didn't want to spend his final years arguing about money. So instead I spent 8 years being lied to," I said. 8 years thinking I was valued equally, that my choices were respected, that my career mattered as much as Lily's. And all that time, you knew you'd decided I was worth less." "It's not about worth," Mom said, her voice strained. "It's about need. Lily has made investments. She's taken on responsibilities." "She makes 4 times what I make," I interrupted. "She's a senior partner at her firm. She's married to a surgeon. Please explain to me how she needs $3.4 million more than I need it." Mom's jaw tightened. "You chose to be a teacher, Daniel. We've always supported that choice, but we also recognized that it meant you'd have less financial security. We wanted to balance things out." The logic was so backward it made my head spin. "So because I chose a career helping kids instead of maximizing profit, you decided to give me less money? How does that balance anything? If anything, giving me more would balance our different earning potentials. This just widens the gap." "Lily has been very generous with the family," Mom said, shifting tactics. "She's hosted holidays. She helped with your grandmother's care. I helped with Grandma too," I said. "I was there every week. I managed her medication schedule. I was the one who found the nursing home. But somehow in your revision of history, that's all Lily's contribution?" Mom's face flushed. "This is why your father didn't want to have this conversation. He knew you'd react emotionally instead of logically." "Emotionally?" I stood up, my hands shaking. "I just found out my parents spent 8 years lying to my face about something fundamental. I just discovered that everything I believed about my family was a carefully maintained fiction. And you're telling me I'm being too emotional?" "Sit down, Daniel," Mom said, her voice sharp with a tone I remembered from childhood, the one that used to make me comply immediately. But I wasn't a child anymore. "No," I said simply. "I came here to tell you that I know what you did. I know about the trust. I know about the lies. I know that you and Dad decided I was worth less than Lily, and you hid it from me for years. And I want you to know that it worked. You successfully destroyed my faith in this family. Congratulations." I headed for the door, and Mom followed. Daniel, wait. You're still getting money. You're still part of this family. This doesn't have to change anything. I turned back to look at her. It changes everything. You just haven't figured that out yet. I left before she could respond, my heart pounding, my hands still shaking. I'd confronted her. I'd told her the truth about what she'd done, and she'd learned nothing, admitted nothing, apologized for nothing. All she'd offered were justifications and deflections, the same careful management she'd been practicing for 8 years. The next few weeks were a blur. I couldn't concentrate on work, going through the motions of teaching while my mind circled endlessly around the betrayal. Rachel suggested I take some time off, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. My students needed me, and honestly, they were the only part of my life that still made sense. When I was explaining the causes of World War I, or helping a struggling student finally understand a difficult concept, I could forget about trusts and percentages and lies. But the moment class ended, it all came rushing back. I stopped answering my mother's calls. She left voicemails that I deleted without listening to, sent texts that I archived without reading. Lily called once, her voicemail brief and formal. I heard you visited Mom. Call me when you're ready to talk like adults. I didn't call back. What was there to say? She'd made her position clear. She was keeping the money, she thought the distribution was fair or at least legal, and she expected me to get over it. About a month after my meeting with Brennan, I got an unexpected call from a woman named Dr. Patricia Delgado, a forensic accountant with 32 years of experience. She'd been recommended by one of the forum users I'd been corresponding with, someone who'd successfully challenged a trust after discovering fraud. I can't promise anything, Dr. Delgado said when we met at her office, but I'd like to review your case. Sometimes what looks ironclad on the surface has vulnerabilities that aren't immediately apparent. I handed over copies of the trust documents, my father's letter, and everything else Brennan had given me. Dr. Delgado spent 90 minutes going through it all, making notes, asking detailed questions about my parents' business, their assets, and the timeline. Finally, she looked up. I'm going to need to do a deeper dive, but I'm seeing some potential irregularities. The timing of certain asset transfers, the structure of the trust itself, there might be something here. Hope flickered in my chest, dangerous and desperate. What kind of irregularities? Potentially fraudulent conveyance, Dr. Delgado said carefully. If your parents transferred assets into the trust specifically to keep them away from creditors or to avoid equitable distribution, that could be challenged. I'd need to see their complete financial records from the past decade, but there are some red flags in what you've shown me. I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite hope, but possibility. What would I need to do? First, you'd need to formally request financial records from the estate. Your mother is the executor, so she'd have to provide them. If she refuses, we can petition the court to compel disclosure. Then I'd analyze everything, looking for patterns, transfers, anything that suggests the trust was structured to unfairly benefit one heir over another through improper means. Dr. Delgado leaned forward. I want to be clear. This is a long shot. Most trusts are structured correctly, and parents have broad discretion over distribution. But the 85-15 split is so extreme, and the timeline is so calculated, that I think it's worth investigating. If nothing else, the investigation itself might reveal information that helps you understand what really happened. I hired her. It took most of my savings, money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on a house, but I hired her anyway. Because even if the investigation went nowhere legally, I needed to know the full truth. I needed to understand the scope of the betrayal, to see every document and transfer and decision that had led to this moment. Dr. Delgado filed the formal request for financial records, and we waited. Mom's response came through her attorney, not Brennan, but a new one, Gregory Stanton, who specialized in estate disputes. The message was clear. She was circling the wagons. Stanton's letter was polite but firm. The estate would comply with all legal requirements, but they questioned the necessity of such an extensive review. The trust documents are clear and legal. This appears to be an emotional response to a valid estate plan rather than a legitimate inquiry into wrongdoing. Reading between the lines, back off, or this gets ugly. But I'd already lost my family. I had nothing left to lose except money that was already being kept from me. I told Dr. Delgado to proceed, and she did. The financial records started arriving in boxes, 10 years of bank statements, investment records, business documents, and correspondence. Dr. Delgado dove in, and I helped where I could, learning more about my parents' financial life than I'd ever wanted to know. And that's when we found it. Buried in the records from 9 years ago, a year before the trust was created, was a series of transfers that didn't make sense. My parents had sold their business for $8 million, a figure I'd known about because they'd been proud of it, had talked about their successful exit and comfortable retirement. But the money hadn't all gone into retirement accounts or investments. A significant portion, about $2 million, had been transferred to an account in Lily's name. Not as a gift, at least not a declared gift. The account was structured as a business partnership, with my parents as silent partners and Lily as the managing partner. The business was vague, something about consulting services, but as far as I could tell, it had never actually operated. It was just a shell, a way to move money to Lily while keeping it technically tied to a business entity. Dr. Delgado's eyes lit up when she showed me the documents. "This is it," she said. "This is the vulnerability. Your parents moved $2 million to your sister 9 years ago, before the trust was even created. Then they structured the trust to give her 85% of the remaining assets. But if we can prove that the business partnership was a sham, that the transfer was actually a premature inheritance disguised as a business investment, then the total distribution becomes even more lopsided. Lily wouldn't have gotten 85%. She'd have gotten 85% plus $2 million that should have been part of the estate." The implications were staggering. My parents hadn't just lied about equal distribution. They'd actively hidden assets, moving money to Lily before my father's death to avoid it being part of the estate calculation. The trust documents showed $4 million being distributed 85 to 15. But the real total should have been $6 million, which meant Lily's actual take was $5.4 million to my $600,000, 90% versus 10%. I felt sick. "Can we challenge this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer was complicated. "We can file a petition with the probate court," Dr. Delgado said. "We'd argue that the business partnership was fraudulent conveyance, that your parents transferred assets to circumvent equitable distribution, and that the true value of the estate should include that $2 million. If we win, that money would be brought back into the estate and distributed according to the trust percentages. You wouldn't get 50% of everything, but you'd get 15% of $6 million instead of 15% of $4 million. $900,000 instead of $600,000. Still grossly unfair, but at least honest about the scope of the unfairness. And more importantly, it would expose what my parents had done, the full extent of their manipulation and deception." "Do it," I said. "File the petition." The legal battle that followed was brutal. Lily hired her own attorney, Amanda Foster, a shark of a litigator with a reputation for aggressive estate defense. Foster filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the business partnership was legitimate, that my parents had every right to structure their assets as they saw fit, and that I was engaging in a fishing expedition motivated by jealousy and greed. The probate court judge, the Honorable Leonard Burke, who'd been on the bench for 18 years, denied the motion to dismiss and ordered discovery to proceed. Both sides were required to produce all relevant financial documents and submit to depositions. Lily's deposition was scheduled first. I wasn't allowed to attend, but Dr. Delgado filled me in afterward. Lily had been poised and prepared, insisting that the business partnership had been her idea, that she'd proposed a consulting venture, and our parents had agreed to invest. She claimed they'd discussed her eventually buying out their share, that it had been a legitimate business arrangement from the start. When asked why the business had never actually operated, she'd said the market conditions had changed, and they'd decided to keep the partnership dormant rather than dissolve it. It was smooth, practiced, and probably coached by Foster, but it had gaps, big ones. Dr. Delgado had found emails between my parents and their financial advisor from 9 years ago, and those emails told a different story. "We want to ensure Lily is taken care of," my father had written. "She's been so supportive of the family, and we'd like to give her a head start on her future. Is there a tax-advantaged way to transfer funds without triggering gift tax implications?" The advisor had suggested the business partnership structure, explicitly noting that it would avoid gift tax reporting requirements as long as the partnership maintained the appearance of legitimate business purpose. It was there in black and white. The partnership wasn't Lily's idea, and it wasn't intended to be a real business. It was a tax dodge designed to funnel money to my sister while avoiding the scrutiny that would have come with a direct gift. We submitted the emails as evidence, and suddenly, Foster's smooth narrative started to crack. The judge ordered my mother to sit for a deposition, and that was even more revealing. Under oath, Mom couldn't maintain the fiction that the business partnership had been legitimate. She admitted that it had been primarily motivated by wanting to help Lily, that there had never been serious business plans, and that they'd kept the partnership alive mostly because dissolving it would have required acknowledging it as a failed venture. "Did you discuss this transfer with your son Daniel?" the attorney asked. "No," Mom admitted. "Did Daniel know that you'd transferred $2 million to Lily outside of the eventual trust distribution?" "No." "Why not?" Mom had hesitated, and I could imagine her sitting there, realizing that any answer would be damning. "We didn't think it was relevant to him," she finally said. "It was a separate transaction. But it affected the total assets available for distribution through the trust, didn't it?" "I suppose so, yes." "So by transferring $2 million to Lily before creating the trust, you ensured that Daniel's eventual 15% would be calculated on a smaller base, correct?" "That wasn't our intention." "But that was the effect?" "Yes." The deposition transcripts were devastating. My mother had admitted under oath that they'd hidden the transfer from me, that it had reduced the estate I'd eventually inherit from, and that it had been motivated by favoritism rather than legitimate business purposes. Armed with that testimony and the emails, Dr. Delgado filed an amended petition arguing not just for the inclusion of the $2 million in the estate calculation, but for a finding of fraudulent conveyance that would require Lily to return the money to the estate before distribution. Judge Burke scheduled a hearing, and for the first time, everyone involved would be in the same room. Me, my mother, Lily, all our attorneys, and the judge who would decide whether my parents' financial manipulation would be exposed and corrected. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, 3 months after I'd first walked into Brennan's office and discovered the truth. I'd lost weight, sleep, and most of my peace of mind. But I'd also found something. Evidence that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right, that my parents had indeed orchestrated a betrayal far more calculated than I'd initially realized. The night before the hearing, Rachel and I sat up late, going over everything one more time. "What's the best-case scenario?" she asked. I'd thought about this obsessively. Best case, the judge finds the business partnership was fraudulent, orders the $2 million brought back into the estate, and distributes it according to the trust percentages. I get an additional $300,000. Lily's manipulation gets exposed publicly. Mom has to face what she and Dad did. And worst case? The judge finds that parents have absolute discretion over their assets, that the business partnership was technically legal even if ethically questionable, and I get nothing except legal bills and a completely destroyed family. Rachel squeezed my hand. "You already have a destroyed family. This is just making the destruction visible." She was right. Whether I won or lost in court, my relationship with my mother and sister was already over. This hearing wouldn't change that. But it might at least establish the truth on the public record, make it impossible for them to keep pretending their actions had been reasonable and fair. The courtroom was small, the kind of space designed for probate disputes and other private family miseries. I sat at one table with Dr. Delgado and our attorney, Marcus Green, who specialized in estate litigation. Lily and Mom sat at the other table with Foster and Stanton. It was the first time I'd seen them both since this whole battle started, and the sight of them sitting together, united against me, drove home the reality of the situation. I was alone on my side. They had each other. Judge Burke entered, and we all stood, and he was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 18 years adjudicating family disputes, tired, cynical, and impatient with bullshit. "Let's get started," he said. "I've reviewed the filings from both sides, and I'm not interested in rehashing arguments I've already read. I want to hear about the business partnership. Specifically, I want to understand whether this was a legitimate business entity or a vehicle for circumventing gift tax and estate distribution laws." Foster stood first, arguing that the partnership had been legitimate, that my parents had made a business decision to invest in their daughter's entrepreneurial ambitions, and that the fact that the business hadn't ultimately operated didn't retroactively make the formation fraudulent. "Parents invest in their adult children's ventures all the time," Foster argued. "Sometimes those ventures succeed, sometimes they fail. That's the nature of business, not evidence of fraud." Green stood for our side. "Your Honor, the emails between the decedent and his financial advisor make crystal clear that this wasn't about investing in a business. It was about transferring wealth to one child while avoiding the tax and disclosure requirements that would apply to a gift. The advisor explicitly suggested the partnership structure as a way to avoid gift tax. That's not a business decision. That's tax avoidance through fraudulent means." Judge Burke interrupted. "Counselor, tax avoidance is legal. Tax evasion is not. Which are you claiming this was?" Green didn't hesitate. "Tax avoidance that crossed into evasion when the partnership was maintained for years without any legitimate business activity, solely to preserve the fiction of business purpose. Additionally, Your Honor, the transfer harmed the petitioner by reducing the estate assets subject to trust distribution, which is fraudulent conveyance regardless of the tax implications." The judge turned to my mother. "Mrs. Hartwell, you're still under oath from your deposition. I'm going to ask you directly. Was there ever a real intention for this partnership to operate as a business?" Mom glanced at her attorney, who nodded slightly. "We hoped it would," she said carefully. "But circumstances changed." "What circumstances?" "Market conditions, Lily's schedule, various factors." "Mrs. Hartwell," the judge said, his patience clearly thin, "I've read the emails. I know what your financial advisor told you. I'm giving you one chance to answer honestly. Was this partnership created primarily as a way to transfer money to your daughter while avoiding gift tax?" The courtroom was silent. I could see Mom's hands shaking slightly as she gripped the table. "Yes," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was the primary purpose." The admission hung in the air. Foster looked like she'd been slapped, clearly not expecting her client to break. Lily's face had gone white. Judge Burke made a note. "And did you discuss this transfer with your son Daniel before or after it occurred?" "No, Your Honor." "Did you consider how it might affect the eventual distribution of your estate?" We thought the trust distribution would be fair on its own." "Fair?" The judge looked down at his notes. 85% to one child and 15% to the other, after already transferring $2 million to the child getting 85%? That was your idea of fair? Mom didn't answer. She didn't have to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Judge Burke looked at both tables. "I'm going to be blunt. This is one of the more egregious examples of estate manipulation I've seen in my years on this bench. The Hartwells created a sham business entity to transfer significant assets to one child, then structured their trust to give that same child the vast majority of the remaining estate, all while explicitly promising their son that everything would be equal. That's not just poor planning. That's calculated deception." He paused, flipping through pages. "However, I'm constrained by the law. The business partnership, while ethically questionable and tax-motivated, was technically legal. The trust distribution, while grossly unfair, was within the decedent's rights to structure. What I can address is the fraudulent conveyance issue. He looked directly at Lily. Ms. Hartwell, the $2 million transferred to you 9 years ago reduced the estate that your brother eventually inherited from. That transfer, combined with the trust distribution, created an outcome so disproportionate that it rises to the level of fraudulent conveyance under estate law. Foster jumped up. Your Honor, there's no evidence that the transfer was made with the intent to defraud creditors or circumvent. I'm not talking about creditors. Judge Burke cut her off. I'm talking about equitable distribution among heirs. The parents had a stated intention to treat their children equally. They made repeated promises to that effect. Then they systematically structured their estate to do the opposite, using legal mechanisms that allowed them to hide the true disparity. That's fraudulent in the equitable sense, if not the criminal sense. He made his ruling. The $2 million transferred to Lily Hartwell through the business partnership is hereby deemed part of the decedent's estate and subject to the trust distribution percentages. That means 15% of $2 million, or $300,000, shall be paid to Daniel Hartwell from his sister's current holdings within 90 days. He looked at Lily. In other words, Ms. Hartwell, you're going to write your brother a check for $300,000, and you're going to do it knowing that this court has found your parents' estate planning to be deceptive and inequitable, even if technically legal. The gavel came down, and it was over. I'd won, sort of. $300,000 that should have been mine all along, and a public finding that my parents had engaged in deceptive estate planning. Not everything I'd wanted, but far more than I'd had 3 months ago. Foster immediately indicated they'd appeal, but Green leaned over and whispered, "They won't win. The judge's ruling is solid, and appeals in probate cases rarely succeed on these facts." I looked across the courtroom at my mother and sister. Mom was crying quietly, and Lily was staring straight ahead, her jaw tight. Neither of them looked at me. Outside the courtroom, reporters were waiting. The case had attracted some media attention, partly because the dollar amounts were significant, partly because the story of parental favoritism and hidden inheritances resonated with people who'd experienced similar family dynamics. I gave a brief statement. Today's ruling confirms what I've been saying from the beginning. My parents promised equality and delivered deception. I'm grateful the court recognized the disparity and took steps to partially correct it. Lily's statement, delivered by Foster, was terse. We disagree with the ruling and are evaluating our appellate options. This is a private family matter that should never have been litigated publicly. But it was public now. The local news ran the story that night, and it spread from there. Online forums picked it up, Reddit threads dissected every detail, and suddenly my private betrayal was a public cautionary tale. Some people supported me, commiserating about their own experiences with unfair inheritances. Others thought I was greedy, that I should be grateful for $600,000 and leave well enough alone. The comments were vicious on both sides, but I mostly ignored them. The public opinion didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth was out, documented in court records and news articles, impossible to deny or reframe. My parents had lied. They'd manipulated their estate to favor Lily, and they'd done it so systematically that even a judge who'd seen countless family disputes had called it egregious. 3 weeks after the ruling, I received a check from Lily's attorney. $300,000, exactly as ordered. No note, no apology, just the check and a legal notation indicating it was in compliance with the court order. I deposited it, adding it to the $600,000 I'd already received. $900,000 total, still just 15% of the real estate value of $6 million, but better than being lied to about $4 million. I used some of the money to pay Dr. Delgado and Green, whose work had been worth every penny. The rest went into savings, toward that house Rachel and I still wanted, the future we were building for Mia. My daughter would grow up knowing her parents didn't play favorites, didn't lie about money, didn't structure secret betrayals disguised as fairness. Whatever else I'd lost in this battle, I'd gained that knowledge. What not to do, what not to be, how not to destroy my children's trust in the name of some twisted logic about desert and need. I never spoke to my mother again. She tried calling a few times after the ruling, but I never answered. What was there to say? She'd had every opportunity to tell the truth, to admit what she and my father had done, to apologize for the decades of deception. Instead, she'd fought me in court, maintained the fiction that their planning had been reasonable, and forced me to expose her lies publicly. Some relationships can't be repaired. This was one of them. Lily and I exchanged exactly one text message 3 months after she sent the check. She wrote, "I hope you're happy. You destroyed what was left of this family over money." I wrote back, "The family was already destroyed. I just made the destruction visible. And it wasn't about the money. It was about the lies." She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. We were done. Had been done since the moment she'd chosen to keep her knowledge secret for 6 months. Had been done since she'd accepted $3.4 million without question or protest. The money sitting in her account, even diminished by $300,000, was a monument to the choice she'd made. Favor over fairness, inheritance over integrity. A year later, I'm teaching still. Because that's what I do. What I chose, despite my parents apparently believing it made me worth less. My students don't know about the trust or the court case or the family implosion. They just know Mr. Hartwell is passionate about history and sometimes brings really good examples of how people screw each other over through legal documents. I'm better at teaching the Gilded Age now, better at explaining how wealthy families structured trusts and corporations to concentrate power and wealth across generations. I bring primary sources to class, real trust documents from historical families, and I have students analyze the language, looking for disparities and favoritism hidden in legal terminology. The kids eat it up. They love seeing how the mechanics of inequality actually work, how privilege gets codified and passed down. I don't tell them I learned these lessons from my own family, but I use what I learned to make them better thinkers, better analysts, better humans who won't accept lies just because they're wrapped in fancy legal language. Rachel and I bought the house, a modest 3-bedroom in a good school district. Mia has her backyard, her swing set, her neighborhood friends. On weekends, I coach her soccer team, showing up for every game and practice because that's what parents do when they actually value their children equally. I think about my father sometimes, wonder if he ever felt guilty about the trust, about the deception, or if he genuinely believed his justifications, convinced himself that my career choice made me less deserving, that Lily's corporate success meant she'd earned the lion's share. I'll never know. He took those answers to his grave, leaving me with nothing but documents and silence. My mother's still alive, living in that house where she lied to my face, where she promised equality while building inequality. I don't wish her harm. I just wish her nothing. She's a stranger who happens to share my DNA, a woman who chose deception over honesty, favoritism over fairness, comfort over courage. She made her choices. I've made mine. The $300,000 the court ordered Lily to pay me? It's sitting in a trust for Mia. When she turns 18, she'll get access to it, money for college or a business or whatever dream she's chasing. And I've written her a letter, sealed and dated, to be given to her along with the money. In it, I explain where the money came from, what her grandparents did, how her aunt participated, and why I fought back. I tell her that fairness isn't about equal outcomes, it's about honest process, that she should never accept lies disguised as love, manipulation wrapped in promises, that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who betray you, and when that happens, you have to decide whether to accept the betrayal or fight back, knowing that fighting back might mean losing everything except your integrity. I tell her that I chose integrity, that I hope she'll make the same choice if she's ever faced with a similar situation, and that I love her and her mother more than anything in this world. Equally. Honestly. Without reservation or hidden agendas or secret hierarchies. The way parents are supposed to love. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the court battle, if I wish I'd just taken the $600,000 and walked away, preserved whatever relationship might have been salvageable with my mother and sister. The answer is no, because the money was never the point. The point was the truth. The point was making visible what they'd hidden, refusing to accept the narrative they'd constructed, insisting on reality, even when reality was ugly and painful and destroyed the pretty illusion of family they'd worked so hard to maintain. My parents promised equality. The trust documents said otherwise, and when I found out, I didn't just accept their lies, I exposed them. That's the story I'll tell Mia when she's old enough to understand. Not that I won money in court, but that I refused to let lies stand, that I valued truth more than comfort, that I fought back against betrayal even when fighting back cost me everything except what mattered most. Some people might call that pride. I call it self-respect. And unlike my inheritance, that's something no one can structure away in a trust document or hide in a sham business partnership. That's mine, earned through the hardest battle I've ever fought. And it's worth more than any percentage of any estate. It's worth everything. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.